Okay, so one other way of saying what is all of this, what has controlling your body and speech got to do with becoming a Buddha? In other words, what has 1 + 1 got to do with being a physicist? Because you can't see the relationship in the beginning, is you have to keep remembering the bigger picture one is that the reason Buddha says to control our body and speech is because that behaviour, our body and speech, are driven by what's in the mind. Now this might sound fairly evident, but I think if we look at the assumptions we have in our modern culture, the assumptions we have in our science and our psychology, it's like we know we have a mind. When we say mind, we say the brain. So we know we have that, and we know that neuroscientists study the brain, but we don't have, only since really Freud, do we have, well no, even the Christians, any internally looking spiritual practitioner would look inside, but we tend to have a view about the mind as being our own secret private business, and I'm allowed to think what I like. This is very deep inside us. We don't have any sense in ordinary life of caution about what we think, because we don't think anybody sees it, therefore it doesn't matter. Are we hearing that point first? Because we're so obsessed with being seen to be a good girl. We don't want to be seen to be a naughty girl. This whole business of punishment and reward is a deeply dualistic, neurotic, philosophical view that underpins everything we do. So the view that our mind is ours, because it's secret, no one sees it. We think we can sit there and have the most insane concepts, the most bizarre fantasies, and think it doesn't matter. I'm allowed to think what I like. Do we kind of accept that that's how we think, right? And as long as no one knows, well, then it's fine. Now that proves we don't think that what goes on in our thoughts matters, doesn't it? It means we don't, it shows us we don't realise the Buddha's view. We don't accept that every thought brings its own results. It's part of the programming. Now, if you think about this, in other words, we don't see much of a relationship between what goes on in our mind and our behaviour. But if you think that, you carry that through to music. Behaviour in music is what you put on the piano, what's the hands on the piano. That's behaviour. Behaviour is not a moral idea. It's simply what you do with your body. Do you understand? It's what you do to the outside. The body and speech is behaviour. So you know that in terms of music, the hands, you put your hands on the piano, don't you? And you have to put your hands on certain keys, don't you? So what determines which keys you put your hands on? What goes, speak it out. What determines that?
The brain.
What? No, that's not what I'm getting at. What determines it? What? And that's called musical theory. Would you agree that musical theory is what you put into practice with your fingers on the piano? And would you agree that musical theory is thoughts? Do you agree with that? And they're really sophisticated thoughts, aren't they? And highly complex and quite precise. So can you imagine saying, oh, I can have whatever musical thoughts I like. It has nothing to do with how I play the piano. You'd be considered schizophrenic, right? Are you hearing the point now? You don't look like you are. You're hearing me. Are you hearing me, people? So we know when it comes to playing music and being a scientist and being a mathematician, even being a cook, that everything you do with your hands and your speech is completely based upon everything, the things that are the correct thoughts, right? But that's how, when we come to morality, we get all nervous about that. That sounds like judgment. But you don't say, don't you judge me, I'm allowed to put 6 teaspoons of salt in a cake if I want to. How dare you say I can't? We're really like very childish, because that's the moralistic view we have about what we call emotions and anger and love and compassion. This is the Buddha's expertise, that stuff. They are all coming down to being thoughts, but we don't think so. It's astonishing. I mean, I read my papers in my iPad. One day on the New York Times, this woman in Brooklyn, she got into her husband's computer, it's okay, Abraham, and she this woman in Brooklyn discovered that her husband was part of a cannibal group on the internet, and they were planning to kill and eat her. She was quite shocked. She didn't call the police, she called the FBI. It sounded more serious, you know. Do you understand? So the point is this, you listen to this. Oh. The lawyer, meant to be an intelligent person, a lawyer, his defence. Oh, they're allowed to think these thoughts. They're allowed to think what they like. That's just their fantasies. That doesn't mean they're going to do it. That's like saying, oh, you're allowed to think, you can have any musical thoughts you like. That doesn't mean you're going to play it. Well, what else would you do with it but play it? Because behaviour is the expression of what's in our mind. But we are so disconnected, so abstractly locked out from our own reality, we don't see any relationship. And because most of what we do with our body and speech, we're on autopilot, it's virtually instinctive. We don't even notice what impels it, which is what is in our mind. This is Buddha's expertise. This is seemingly his revelation, although you would think it's not rocket science, but it is to us. Are we communicating here? So it's too advanced to look in your mind. We're too berserk. You know, if you've been playing music for 27 years the wrong way and you've practiced it to perfection, you've got to start changing your habits before you start learning new theory. You've got to stop playing the old piano pieces and control yourself, and then give yourself space to start looking at the new theories because you're so addicted to the old one. That's how we are. And Buddha happens to say we come programmed into this life addicted with our own ridiculous habits, you know. So it takes time to notice the mind. And this is high school. So you've got to control your body and speech first. At least begin this. But that's kind of boring. Oh, I want to practice meditation. I thought Buddha talked about meditation. I want to be mindful. Well, control your body and speech first. This is why it's so bizarre, you know. You can sit there and be all holy for 1 minute and do your meditation, and then you go home and have a fight with your husband. No wonder you can't meditate. If you're berserk speech, if you can't even control your speech, which we can't, most of us. We don't even think speech matters. Because you don't get arrested for shouting. You get arrested for stealing 5 shekels, but not for abusive words. You don't even value speech, because we don't value thoughts. Unless it's theoretical thoughts and intelligent. I mean, conceptual and music and that kind of thoughts. But not emotional stuff. It's just my own business. Very bizarre, you know? Very strange. The Buddha's point is every single tiny millionth of a second thought is all part of the process of programming you and turning you into the person you become. Just like every bit of musical theory you have that turns you into the musician you become. We know it when it comes to that stuff, but when it comes to this, we're ridiculous. You know? In fact, as Lama Zopa says, the vast majority of all humans on this planet have no idea that what goes on in our mind plays any role at all in our lives. That's how mad we are, you know. Demented, disconnected from ourselves. And then the trouble is, we know that stuff goes on in our mind. But because we don't have techniques to pay attention to it, we have lots of techniques in our culture to pay attention to your body and your speech. Behave nicely, don't steal, don't kill. We all respect that, at least a little bit. But not techniques about your mind. We don't even think about it. Because we think it's... Again, and I'm not being rude about the brain, but because we think it's the brain, so we know we have thoughts, and we just want to know which part of the brain is working. That's helpful. It doesn't help you change your thoughts, though. That's where introspection comes in. That's Buddha's expertise. Of course, anybody, in all religious traditions, they've got this. You Jews, you know the Buddha, the Hindus, everybody, the Catholics, the Christians, all of them. You get really devoted Muslims and Catholics and Jews together, the ones who truly practice internally. They're all talking about the same thing. You could argue, not really, but you could argue, in terms of experience and virtue and goodness and empathy, you know, because they're introspective. That's the key. So that's high school. But you've got to control your body and speech first. So let's talk about that then. Junior school. And some of the nuts and bolts of karma. Now the point is this here. Just like you know, theoretically, if you're aiming to be a physicist, you've got to understand 1 + 1 is 2 and all the maths and the sums and the whatever you all call those terms. I don't know what they are. Now, in the beginning, you don't see the relationship. But as you learn maths, as you learn all the other things, what do you have to learn to be a physicist? You learn what's trigonometry, all these things. Geometry, trigonometry, the other one with an A, what's it called? Algebra, all these words. I don't know what they mean. I've never studied them. But you have to learn all those things, right? So the more you study, the more you go, oh, now I see how this leads me to physics. It'll dawn on you, won't it? Are you with me, people? Are you with me? It makes sense, doesn't it? So same here with the Dharma. In the beginning, when Mummy says, don't lie, don't kill, don't steal, it just sounds like instructions, you know. But gradually, as you learn that, then you go to high school, you learn about the mind, it starts to dawn on you how abiding by the laws of karma, the essence of junior school, becoming your own therapist and distinguishing between delusions and virtue is the essence of high school. These both lead you to realise emptiness. You begin to see the logic. So let's look at that logic in relation to emptiness. then we'll go into karma a bit more. So the broad one approach of Buddha's, that is one way of describing his entire path from A to Z, which again is implied by Sangye, and implied by the first part, the wisdom wing, Sang. He says, we can rid the mind, and the achievement of Buddhahood is when you've done that, of all neuroses, all delusions, all the nonsense. So now, this is now briefly high school, and I'll say it here, but we'll go back to karma too. When you study the Buddhist model of the mind, when you study the Four Noble Truths, when you study what suffering is in the Second Noble Truth, where Buddha outlines it, suffering and its causes, the root cause is what happens in the mind. So the root cause of happiness for the Buddha is the virtues, Sangye, the development of all the goodness. The root cause of happiness is cultivating kindness, love, wisdom, compassion, intelligence, the good qualities. Be very simple about it. They are the source of one's own happiness. Not just now in the moment, but they are programming our consciousness in virtue and wisdom, and that ripens in the future as happy experiences. This is karma, okay, we'll go into it. Yeah, abstract to us. Yes, we don't think this normally. And it's not reward, we do it to ourselves. Just like if you play piano, you produce your own musician. No one rewards you with becoming like Mozart. You become your own Mozart by doing the work. You become your own Buddha by doing the work. You produce yourself. So happy, and then you've got the neurotic states of mind. They cause now misery and depression and misery and disturbingness, and in the future program our mind that will ripen as suffering experiences. This is the fundamental principle of karma in junior school. The principle of this law of cause and effect. So clearly that means in high school we better know what he means by suffering, and we'll go into that. But let's look at karma first, the first one. The logic of abiding by the laws of karma is the logic of not smoking too many cigarettes because you don't want future suffering. That's the principle of karma. So again, let's look at this briefly in relation to Buddha's model of morality. He is not a creator, he's not an alternative to a creator, so therefore he didn't make up this stuff. And this is another point. I'm sure, since the Christian and the Jewish teachings in our, say, European culture, we've only, in the beginning, at the time, back then, certainly as far as I'm concerned, all the Catholic lot, ran the show, the Catholics ran the show in Rome and those places, the Catholic Church, then the only view of morality was God's law. This is reasonable. There was no concept of what we now call natural law. There probably was, but the real thought, even my Jesuit priest friend said, natural law does play some role, meaning don't kill. The natural part of it is because people don't like getting killed. But the God's law part is the main one that makes it wrong. That is that because God said, and I am not criticising. If you are truly a devoted Jew or Muslim, you'll live a happy life. Because you know that God's got a plan, and you don't need to stick your nose in and ask him what it is, you trust him. That, for me, is a profound way to live your life. I'm not complaining. It's just not Buddha's view, that's all. So God's law implies he's the boss and he made it all. He created it. And that's a profound view. It's a profound difference if you get the other part. But then we have materialism, which we call natural law. And they're the only two options we have for natural law and God's law. That's it. But the Buddha's got another take on that. He's got the same view. He says it's natural law. So like I mentioned, there's one question in my whole entire Buddhist life that I've only had from one person. We all asked the same questions. And there was a scientist in New Zealand, Nelson, in fact, and he said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? Now that's an obvious question if we take the view of a creator, which means it's all revelation. Necessarily, isn't it? God is beyond everybody, beyond Abraham, beyond Moses, beyond the lot. And he passed it down. And then all the religions that come along, like Mr. Smith, that one who God appeared under a tree or something. I'm not being rude. The Seventh-day Adventists or the Muslims or the Mormons or something. All the different people, right, have their visions and they present their variations of what God revealed to them. That by definition is what we mean by religion. Meaning it's beyond ordinary. Therefore it's not our business. Therefore we can't know it. We have to rely on revelation from on high. Now, in the ordinary materialist world, it's the same philosophical view. It's what Mummy said, and Daddy said, and the judge said, and the law said, and the government said. It's on high, it's above, and someone imposes it. Don't do this and do that. That's our view of morality. That's what I'm trying to get at. But it's religion or materialism, it's the same. Somebody says not to do it, and I'll get punished. Somebody says do it, I'll get rewarded. That's our view. It's deep in our bones. That view, Buddha disagrees. He's dualistic, he says. It's not the real thing. So he is saying he's a regular guy who, from his own hard work, coming from this amazing tradition, doing all the internal work, this marvellous philosophy and detailed views of the universe, he internalised all this. And then he went further, he says, and came to the conclusion that there is not one atom of any independent sense of a self or soul. Therefore, there's not one atom of any being who's got those characteristics, called a creator, who's above everything and who imposes and creates. That's a dualistic view, he says, and he says it's just not like that. He says that's a misinterpretation. He's not being rude. He's allowed to say that. That's his own experiential findings. He says it's a mistake. There is no creator. He's also saying we don't need creating. We don't need creators. We're fine on it. We do well on our own. So, of course, that implies, the Buddha's view, with your consciousness, which is not physical. This is what we have to take on board as our hypothesis here. Otherwise, it's all nonsense what we're talking about. It has to be internally coherent. We have to posit here the possibility, Buddha's view, his observation, that our consciousness, our mind, like we discussed yesterday, the people who do shamatha, concentration meditation, discover this. You've got the grosser level, which is where our consciousness, our thoughts and feelings and emotions exist in dependence upon the brain working nicely, etc., etc., etc. So technically here, like we're saying, Buddha says the mind itself, the thoughts themselves, the consciousness itself, the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions themselves are not a function of the brain. The way I like to put it is the brain is a physical indicator of what is going on at the grosser level of our mind. That to me is a good statement for the Buddhist view. It's an indicator. Because mind and body are interdependent. Mind and brain are interdependent. If we're angry, we can see evidence of it in the brain. Is that right? That's how it goes, isn't it? So the brain is a physical indicator of the fact that there is anger in the mind. That's the way to say it. That's the way I'd say it as a Buddhist. The brain is a physical indicator. In other words, if you see me burst into tears, that's physical, isn't it? You can indicate there's some pain in my mind. You get my point? It's kind of obvious. But the tears themselves are not the mind. The eyes wide with horror are not the mind. They're the physical indicator of the panic in my mind. It's not such a complicated concept. So anyway, the point here. Buddha's view of consciousness is that of course it's weird, but we're grown-ups. We can hear this. It won't give us a panic attack. That our consciousness is like this river of mental moments. It's the name given to the contents of the mind, your thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, what even you want to call your soul or your spirit. He doesn't use those words. This entire spectrum of our inner being, consciousness, mind, capacity for cognition, that functions through the senses and functions mentally, functions conceptually and functions emotionally and functions at a subtler level. Of course, we don't posit that. And at that level, if you were to see a person who had accomplished single-pointed concentration, this technique these Indians came up with, it's a central technique in Buddhism, if you were to see a person who'd accomplished this single-pointedness, these 9 stages of single-pointed concentration, they would look like they were dead. They would be brain dead. That's why at the time of death, the Buddhist view from the Vajrayana model is described in 8 stages of this gradual deconstruction of the various physical and mental components of the person, and it's described in great detail in all the literature. So by the 4th stage is when you stop breathing. The senses have ceased. So that is when we in the materialist world say a person is dead. Actually, I'll quote that here. When I was working on this book of Lamas over Rinpoche's, How to Help at the Time of Death, I read this book by an American medical journalist called Dick Teresi. He's a very funny fellow. He says he's atheistic. He's got no views about these things, but he's very funny journalist. He's a medical journalist. So in this whole book, he called it The Undead. And it's not about zombies. It's actually about, for him, doing all his research, especially in the States, about the real serious contradictions that are coming up now in the medical profession in the States, related directly to the whole business of cutting out organs, you know? That suddenly now the whole business has been, in all cultures for centuries, there have been reports, haven't there, of people having out-of-body experiences, of people, in other words, having, you know, he's got a whole chapter, for example, of people in their operations who are unconscious physically, but are, as they say, have an experience of floating above their body and can remember everything that was done and said. So, of course, medicos are completely cynical about that. Don't be ridiculous, impossible, you know, because the brain has gone to sleep. But one woman in this book, in this chapter, he had one woman had to have the most radical procedure that demanded that from the Western point, the medical point of view, she had to be practically dead. So from their point of view, there was no way she'd be conscious. She reported the most vivid experience. They could not argue with it. So also in this book, because, like for example, reporting over the centuries, people coming back to life, as we call it, people knocking on the coffin. There's reports for centuries on this. But no one in the materialist view knows what to do with that. So we put it in the too hard basket. Oh, well, what to do? You know, it doesn't fit with the brain conscious. The brain science doesn't fit. You can't answer it. So because of all these things that are coming up, like people having the liver ready to cut out, getting the mother to sign the form, and the guy comes back to life, you know? Oh, but put the liver back, sort of like this, types of things, problems. And he was quite cynical about the industry, with respect, you know. It's amazing what people do, but he said it's the elitist one, the most amount of money is flying around, and it really can become quite unethical. He was suggesting, never mind, whatever, you have to look into it. But one doctor, from all these experiences, you know, he said, I can say now with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but that much I can say. So I think it's fantastic, these types of things happening. And that's why the conversations between the Dalai Lama and his mob the last 30 years and all the scientists, it's just fantastic, opening up the world to these different views. It's all been published. It's marvellous, you know, it's so good. So in other words, instead of the Dalai Lama sitting in his own ivory tower, being superior, being a Buddhist with his views, he comes to people and he brings these wonderful conversations and brings in the scientists and the psychologists and the neuroscientists, and they all adore him and are really blown out by the knowledge that they never knew that Buddhism had. Nobody knows, you know, the Indians as well from before Buddha. It's astonishing, sophisticated view of the universe. So, consciousness for the Buddha, and this is a fundamental hypothesis for us if we want to take on board the whole Buddha's view. The whole of Buddhism as a worldview would fall into a heap of utter absurdity if consciousness is not physical and if it is not beginningless and endless. The whole of Buddha's worldview is dependent upon this view, so it's part of, you know, it's part of the whole view. So to take it on, you've got to just hypothesize it. We're grown-ups, we can do that, you know. You can't squeeze it in and try and believe it and comprehend it immediately. It won't work. It's like I say, you know, if you were been a regular allopathic doctor for 50 years, that's your system, that's the world, and all the world around you only knows that system. And suddenly you meet these weird, wacko Chinese people who talk about meridians and stick needles in you. Of course you think they're ridiculous in the beginning. Don't be ridiculous, you'll say. It's like another universe, another language. That's what Buddhism is. Another language in relation to either the creator model or the philosophical materialist model. So you've got to open our minds if we're interested. And it could be a load of rubbish, but you've got to look into it to find out. So, okay, let's look at what Buddha means by karma. It's a Sanskrit word. It means simply action, but what it's actually referring to is the word, we mentioned it last night, in the third category of states of mind, like the mechanics of our mind, if you like, intention, volition, I will. So we begin the process of programming our mind. We begin the process of sowing seeds in our mind. And the Buddha would say every millisecond what we think and therefore do and say is this process of creating karma, is this process of sowing seeds, is this process of programming our consciousness, because every thought counts. Every word we say counts. Every action we do with our body counts. In just the same way that everything you put in your garden will bring a result, logically, based on the logic of botany. Well, Buddha says every millisecond of every thought, every feeling, every emotion, every word, every action is part of the natural law of the law of karma. So he's saying he's not a creator, so he didn't make it up. He has observed it. That's the simple point. If you hear Einstein tell you about relativity, you know it's not from revelation. You know he didn't have a vision of it. You hope he just didn't make it up in a random way. I mean, what a bizarre fellow, you know. And you know it's come from his own hard work with his mind, and it's his observation about the universe. That's what a botanist is. That's what a mathematician is. That's what a cook is. That's what an architect is. That's what a musician is. It's simply taking the energy of the universe, and we articulate it because we're all so intelligent, and then produce it in a certain model, calling it music, mathematics, botany. So, are we with me, people? Are you with me, people? Are you with me, people?
Yes.
Buddha is like that. He says he's not the other one that is a creator above and beyond who made up something and then you believe it. He's not that one. For him there's no such thing as that one. It just happens to be his view of natural law includes the fact that mind is not physical, includes a past life and a future life. That is his observation. I'm not asking you to believe him. But we're so addicted to assuming science means only the physical. That's the term we use, another fancy Greek word for the physical. Whatever the word means, what does it mean in Greek? Do we know? Science, how do you translate it? Something to do with what?
Knowledge. To know.
Is it? That's the word. That's what it means.
Yeah.
Good, wonderful. Buddha's perfect. Cognition. Perfect. Oh, I love it. He would have liked that word. He had been really good at the Greek words. They all suit Buddhism. Except we're using Indian words, you know, so it's weird. So are we communicating here?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's look at the nuts and bolts of karma now. The details of botany. There's the principle, now we're on the details. And this is what is an interesting point. You would never say, oh, I believe in botany. Would you? You'd laugh. People laugh at you, right? I believe in mathematics. We never say that. You'd be laughed at. Okay, good. Why wouldn't you say it? Someone tell me why you wouldn't say it. Give me a reason. Why wouldn't you say it?
Because it's not a religion. It's not something we believe in.
So what is it instead? This is the point now. What is it instead?
It's based on observation.
Practice.
It's something that's come up. It's a law. Someone's observed it and articulated it. And within itself it should be coherent. So that's what it is, yeah? Good. So then you would investigate it, wouldn't you? And you'd eventually, if you study botany, you'd prove it to be true yourself, wouldn't you? That's mathematics. Is that music? Is that cooking? Well, that's Buddhism. We're not used to thinking this way, but that's Buddhism. And I mean that literally and exactly, but we're not used to thinking that. Are you resisting this when I say it? Yeah, are you going but?
Yeah.
Is there buts? What are the buts? Good, say some buts. But. What's your butt? No, I mean it sincerely, what are your buts? Can you hear the point I'm saying?
How do you, so why are people conceiving it like something you need to believe in?
No, never mind that. That's assumed. But what I'm wanting the buts. You're fine. What are the buts? But it can't be. But what are the buts? Please? Is that a hand? What? What's a butt? When I say to you that Buddha is the same as Einstein, that everything he presents is what he's found from his own experience, and he says it's the way the world is. So where's your butt?
Experiment.
Excuse me, who says you don't experiment what Buddha says? Stop, no, stop right now. Stop for a second, stop. Already you have a wrong assumption. Where does it say that you wouldn't take Buddha's instructions and put them into practice? Where does it say that?
It doesn't say, but
But stop, please, you have to, we've got to start. So if you, first of all, would you agree that some things are easier to prove than others? If you're a beginner, but would you agree that if you want to prove, let's say you want to prove relativity,
it's hard.
what would you need to do?
It's hard.
What would you need to do?
Flying.
What are the steps you go through? Start at the beginning, right at the beginning. What are the steps you go through?
You read about
No, sorry. You go to school and you learn math. You learn all the components. You learn for probably years, right? Studying math, studying trigonometry, studying all these algebras. Would you agree? Agree, agree, agree. Every step of the way. And what would you do when you study 1 plus 1? That's the first step, isn't it? What would you do with that? How would you prove that? That's the first step. How would you prove it?
You can't. It's an
How would you prove it?
It's an axiom.
Axiom.
Use it.
Excuse me, how do you prove it? What's the process you go through? This is the answer to these questions.